Yeah, the talk today. Today the platforms reproduce inequalities. We're delighted to have Pia with us to discuss labour platform in the context of Argentina, the conditions of workers and the main effects of the COVID-19 crisis. Pia is the PI for Fair Work Argentina and a researcher at the Centre of Research of Public Administration from the University of Buenos Aires, emphasizing on managing the research on the platform community. So she works on research in the platform economy. She's also a PhD candidate at the same time and is co-tutored between Universidad de Buenos Aires and University Sorbonne, and has a BSc in economics from the University of Buenos Aires. What we're going to do today is have a presentation for kind of 40-ish minutes and then have some Q&A afterwards, if that's all right. I know Pia is very keen to run this as much as a kind of dialogue as possible. It's not like a here's the talk and then some straight back questions. So do feel free to kind of put your hands up if there's points of clarification or things for discussion. In the actual Q&A itself, I'll re-emerge and you'll have to put up with me again for a minute, and I'll kind of try and moderate some of the online questions in. So if you're online, please feel free to pop stuff into the Q&A panel. If they're clarification points, Pia might be able to see them and respond to them. But realistically, she's going to be looking at the presentation, so we can always circle back to them at the end, and I'll fill them in. So I'm not going to take any time. It's delightful for me to be able to introduce somebody that I consider both a colleague and a friend, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing what Pia has to say. But yeah, you take it away. I'm going to get out of everyone's way.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone for coming, especially. This is here. Thank you. I don't want to cover the screen. Well, this is mainly to explain the Argentinian context of the labor market and how the labor platforms insert themselves in this system, and whether just to make sure if with the current of the persistent inequalities in that labor market, if labor platforms contribute to reducing them or to reproducing them. First of all, I'm going to make like a short recap of the Argentinian context, and especially after the pandemic crisis. Right now, the Argentina situation is quite delicate. We have a huge amount of inflation, 100% a year, and almost half of the population is poor. However, one of the most curious things is that this part of the population, there are many people who do have jobs. Many people of that 50% who are poor already have jobs. So there is a severe crisis in the labor market, and that has to do mainly with the labor conditions, the informality, not registering the work, and labor platforms insert themselves in this kind of context, especially after the pandemic. We know that they have been an alternative to reducing risks, to generate an easy way of income. And mainly it was at first for the migrant population who have more trouble registering and doing like the first entrance in the labor market. However, after the pandemic, it became like a normal thing to work in these kind of conditions. And as we may see afterwards, some of them may be quite controversial. So that's what I will try to develop here. Of course, if you have any questions, if you want to raise your hand or do a double click in something, please do. What I will try to do. There it is. We made a survey in Argentina about platform workers around this time of year 2 years ago. And this was compared with the national survey, which is made on the economically active population. So that's what the main things that I'm going to develop right now. We surveyed workers of 7 platforms. However, here we have only 6. This is because one of them has left the country. Beat is a ride-hailing company. And it was also not that relevant, but it was used as a reference. However, we are using the 6 platforms. They are 2 delivery platforms, Pedidos Ya and Rappi. Pedidos Ya is Argentinian, Uruguayan, and Rappi is Colombian. Then we have Cabify, which I'm sure you already know, Didi as well, which is Chinese, Uber, and Solvers, which is an Argentinian company, but is a domestic service company, mainly cleaning, not therapeutic or care tasks. This survey was made around the metropolitan Buenos Aires area. It's mainly the suburbs and the city of Buenos Aires itself. We made more focus in the city of Buenos Aires because it's where the platforms were more active by then. And we tried to, well, we surveyed more than 800 platform workers, and we tried to make it, well, it's, in these cases, it's really hard to make a random sampling, you know, because we don't know what the universe is about. It's a hidden population. It's like the trans population. So in this case, we had to approach the delivery workers, the riders, that was a little bit more easier. However, with the ride hailing, we had to book a trip, maybe to the gastronomic centers, try to take advantage of that two tasks at the same time. And then with domestic services, the platform was quite helpful at first by providing the contacts in order for them to be surveyed. And it was made during the phone. We were with curfews by that time. So it wasn't that easy to approach workers and to try to establish face-to-face contacts. So this was a different kind of situation compared to right now. So starting with the socio-demographic profile, I mean, who are they? Who are the platform workers in Argentina? Starting with their age, we can see, I wanted to make one last clarification. We have previous databases. One was that was quite similar, and it was made to platform workers in Argentina in 2018. This is 2021. And then there's another one that was made by the ILO, and it was made only to riders, to delivery workers. And it was in 2019. And we used that, we're going to see afterwards, we used that to compare and to see some kind of evolution, whether things changed. We were going to analyze that afterwards. Well, the age range. We can see a clear difference here between the delivery workers, who are younger, who have to do physical work, it's harder work, than with the ride-hailing companies and with domestic services. Please let me know if you don't remember which one is which. Mainly is the delivery companies here, the platforms, sorry, the ride-hailing platforms here, and domestic services. I will make just a small clarification with domestic services. In this case, domestic services has separate employment status. I'm going to develop this a little bit later. So in this case, there's quite an impact of that regulation, and the platform tries to comply with that. Not that hardly, but at the same time, we will see a difference. And also bear in mind that this was made during curfew and after, well, exiting the pandemic. So women were still really linked to care tax in their place, at the place. So they weren't working that much, or maybe reduced time schedules. Oh, sorry, this is in Spanish, the educational level. In this case, we can see this, I made a small comparison with the economically active population. This is the EAP, the National Survey of Workers in Argentina. In this case, we can see that in delivery companies, the workers are more educated, at least in average, the surveyed ones. And in the case of the ride-hailing companies, it's the other way around. They have less access to especially university or tertiary studies. That was different from what we expected. So far, this is quite what we would expect in the labor market, or at least in the platform labor market. Did I change? No. Okay. So I will explain this table before developing it. First, we have the three sectors: delivery, ride-hailing, and domestic service. Then we have the dedication, how much they spend a week on average. And then we have two other questions. First, whether they feel like their own boss, how much of an autonomic job does it feel? And then the motivation, what led them to start working for a platform. And what's most curious about this table, at least in my own opinion, is that their sensation of autonomy increases when they're working more hours per week. You see the overworked laborers, the ones who spend over 45 hours per week. These are the ones that are the less worried about being more dependent. However, they spend more hours per week working on that platform. So it's like it's not a fake, but it's a difficult way of thinking to be autonomous, of independent. Another thing that really was insightful for me, and mainly it has mainly to do with the motivation, is that in the first databases, it wasn't that common to find these answers, that they couldn't find another job, so they had to switch to platforms. These answers were more linked with the flexibility, with the able to work, to have an extra income and to have another job at the same time. Now, after the pandemic, it was really common to find these kind of answers, even though they think that they are autonomous and they work a lot per week. This is what I told you about domestic service. You know, there are no people that are overworking in these cases, mainly because of regulation, and also it has a link with the care tasks at home. So, oh, I'm sorry, I think, yeah, I just skip this page. Just to clarify this gender situation, well, in the domestic services platforms, they were all women, at least the ones we surveyed. And in ride-hailing companies, we see a really small population of women. However, in delivery platforms, although it's a small percentage, it's quite bigger than the previous databases. They were close to 5%. So we could see that in terms of gender, we can see a bigger participation of women in this case. And in this case, talking about the migrants, the participation of migrants, this also led to a change. And this was more significant that in the gender case, especially in delivery platforms. This, the dark blue bar, is the participation of native population. This was exactly the other way around before the pandemic. And that has to do with what I just told you about the labor market situation. Labor market situation in Argentina, beyond platforms, it's quite delicate. And many Argentinians had to turn to this kind of jobs, not only as a source of extra income, but also as a source of your main source of income, you know, as your principal job. And that's what changed, mostly in this kind of platforms. In the ILO database, the delivery companies concentrated 64% of migrants population, and 40% were from Venezuela. And in this case, it was all the other way around. The migrant population started to decrease, not to decrease, but I think it was more Argentinians coming than migrants in this case. So there was a significant change compared to that. So now we know who they are on average. Now we have to see how are they working, which are the working conditions. This is in months, how much have they been working for each platform. Solvers, this is the domestic service company, is the oldest one. So this also makes sense, but it's almost 4 years on average of people working for that platform. But then we can see that we have to start from the base that platforms mostly claim that their job is temporary, it's an extra source of income, it's like to help you with your studies or with some projects. In this case, we're kind of seeing that it's not like that. It's not working like that. You know, these are the delivery companies. You see that on average, remember, on average, they are working for at least a year on platforms. I am actually interviewing right now for the second year of Fair Work delivery workers. And on average, I'm getting like 3 years. So it's really crazy that the main purpose or the main guideline is like to be like a temporary exit. And this is not only the platform's responsibility, it's also the Argentinian labor market responsibility, that you can't seem to get anything better, you can't seem to get out, but also, from what I gather, the workers also don't have notion of how much they actually earn, because they have their income. However, they have to spend a lot of things, they have to cost a lot of things in order to work for those platforms. And they're not quite aware of what the net income actually is. And that, in time, it starts to last. Didi, which is the shortest one, it was, at that time, it was operating for, I think, 10 months. It was new in the country. So this is like a kind of exception. Uber, 2 years on average. So it's quite strong impact. And this is the average weekly load of, but it was separated between migrants and natives. And we could see that the migrant population on average spent a lot more of hours per week working for the platforms. That was relatively similar to the previous databases. Okay, so before getting into this, thing is, okay, we can see some evidence towards dependent work. I don't know if that's the expression here, dependent work, like a legal registration relationship of employment. Platforms always claim that their workers should be autonomous, they are independent workers. In Argentina, we have 2 employment status, the registered, the dependent one, and then the independent worker, except for domestic service, who has its own employment status. So far, we've seen that it's not a temporary job, and it spends a lot of hours per week. And it's also, we will see in the next slides, it's also, in majority, their main source of income. So there is quite an evidence about dependency. However, in order to do that, we had to go over what defines dependency: labor dependency, work dependency, employment dependency. In Argentina, as I said, we have 2 employment status. However, we have to dig into what the ILO defines as dependent job. And first of all, we have 2 different things. In independent contracts, such as the ones that are, or terms and conditions, which are the ones that occur in the case of platform labor, we have, there is the main condition is that the parts have to be equal in power. There doesn't have to be an asymmetry between the bargaining power of those 2 parties. So monitoring, controlling, disciplinary power shouldn't be that hard on the workers. However, this is another thing that I'm gathering from the last interviews, and it's getting quite severe because it evolves. They are also being controlled with the amount of journeys or rights that they reject. You get a certain amount of rejections per day. If not, you get blocked. And it shouldn't be the case of an independent work, at least from the legal framework in Argentina. Then, I mean, this is the evidence from other people who studied that from the legal point of view. And now the ILO also studied the technical dependency and the economic dependency. Those three sources should be the enough evidence in order to prove that you are a dependent worker. So this one was the first one. Then the technical dependency, that's the disciplinary power. And that's what I was just telling you. In these cases, they have some demands towards the deadlines. As you may see in the presentation, 53% of the delivery workers, of the writers, are saying that they have certain demands regarding how much orders they make, how late are they for their orders, and that is getting worse. That they have the demands and the algorithm demands get more complex in time. This was made in 2021, and now I can see that that's already changing because they have more requests, more demands, and more things that they have to comply in order to not be sanctioned, not be blocked, and to keep earning as much. That also had to do with the legal framework. If you're an independent worker, you should be the owner of your own, the elements that you use to your job, your vehicle, your cell phone, and also the maintaining of those. So in that case, we have that incoherence, because you see the demands, but you also have to take care of your own things. So if you're an independent worker, but you don't get to reject orders, in this case, the elements should be provided by the company, by the platform in this case. And finally, that was what I was telling you about, the economic dependency. This has two aspects. The pay, I mean, how, in what proportion the income that they get from the platform work is their main source of income. Translation, almost 90%, 89% in 2018 and 2021, 86% claim that the income that they make from the platform is their main source of income. And the same for ride hailing, and the same from domestic services. As you may see, this is quite consistent with the previous databases. So that's one of the main things that we can say, that it's not an extra source of income. It's not a way out or a thing that you can do while you study. And also, even more, if you compare it with the time that you spend per week on the platform. This is domestic services, as you may see, less hours per week, but look at the delivery and ride hailing dedications per week. Between 35 and 45 hours per week, 28 and 22%. Look at this case, the over-occupation, more than 45 hours per week. More than half of the workers from delivery sectors and the ride-hailing sectors are over-occupied, in conditions of over-occupation, and they depend economically on the company. So with these three aspects, the legal, the technical, and the economical, we have enough evidence that it should be dependent work. However, there are many things you can claim. I mean, if you frame platform work on the legal framework that's linked, at least in Argentina, with the registered work. You have to work 8 hours per week, they are fixed. You don't get time flexibility, you don't get to organize your own schedule, you don't get to have your own vehicle, you don't get your autonomy. So there's the debate. Should it be less restricted so they could be independent workers? Should it be more restricted and they become dependent workers? Or should it be separate? There have been 5 initiatives. Well, this is what we said. There have been 5 initiatives, and there are 7 here, but one has been already expired. And this one, I will tell you about this. But the other, this, and this are 5 bills, 5 initiatives, law initiatives that the Argentinian government has brought to the Congress. They haven't been debated, neither of them. Argentina, as I have said, has quite a big crisis, so it is not that prioritized. However, it's starting to become important again with they're going to make a labor reform eventually, so that will have to be linked with labor platforms, with platform labor. But these initiatives have been quite diverse, and they all of them are swinging between either autonomy or either dependency. Some of them because they're more linked with the trade unions, and some trade unions in Argentina are quite powerful and they want more people, linked to them. Or in the other case, for example, they should be independent workers. They should have their own company. We should make a registry just to protect their data and see how many are they, but that's it. However, there has been this initiative which came from the Ministry of Labor, and this is the one that suggests to make a separate employment status. It's not the same as the one in domestic service, which is more designed for people who work by the hour, because each hour you work, you get your proportion of contributions and the pensions. But in this case, as you may see, if you work more than 32 hours per week with the same platform, then you should be registered. If not, it would be like the domestic service employment status. So in Argentina, this initiative, however, wasn't brought to Congress. It was just a proposition, like a project made by the Ministry of Labor, but it didn't reach Congress. None of the politicians took it in order to debate it. So the thing is, there's no innovation. And well, according to what we found, neither of the two positions, employment dependency or autonomy, is a solution. Because you have to, even though we know that the conditions of labor platform, of platform labor are quite precarious, as we've just seen, there are many things that are not complying with the basic labor conditions. And also we have to be aware that flexibility and the new standards of consumption of just-in-time, digital, remote things after the pandemic must be also considered. And that is why I think it was really important for Argentina, and I think for many countries, to join the Fair Work Initiative. Are you familiar with the Fair Work Initiative? Are you all Oxford Internet Institute belongs to here? So I don't know how much detail should I give you about the main principles, the main guidelines. I just go over it, and if not, you can tell me to fast forward. It's just a really small recap, but I will tell you how this contributes to the Argentinian experience and why it is important. The main objective of Fair Work is to promote and to establish fair working conditions in gig economies, in cloud work, and many other sectors. But in this case, we applied it to the gig economies, right? Hailing, delivery, domestic services. Their principles are 5. They are established by many conventions regarding labor, and this is like the minimum standards. Even if you're an independent worker, this is like the minimum you must get for any kind of job, any work you do. The fair pay, which is that you have to at least earn a minimum wage for every task you do. Then fair conditions, which are related to the reducing or the compensating of risks associated to your job when you do your job, especially these kind of jobs that you are in the street and you deal with the traffic, and you may have accidents or robbery. These things have to be considered. Do you have insurance? Do you have protection against that? Do you have prevention against that? Then contracts. You can be dependent worker, you can be autonomous, but the conditions must be clear. You can't have in your cell phone just a terms and condition that you just click and you don't get to read and you don't get a copy, and if there's an update, you don't know what happens. Fair management. Fair management has to do with how is the dialogue with that company. If you need help, if you have any trouble, if you have an accident, if you have a problem with a client or the restaurant, where should you report that? How can you make sure that that won't happen again? Or if someone is doing the best for that not to happen again? Is the platform inclusive, or your employer or your client is inclusive? Is it promoted for every sector of the population? Is it more difficult for women? Is it more difficult for trans generation? Is it more difficult for other people? And last of all, the representation. You should be able to discuss with your colleagues. You should be able to express and manifest your voice and your concerns to whoever is employing you. Yeah, so as we may have seen, we know that the labor market situation in Argentina is delicate. It has a lot of pre-existing inequalities, but so far, platform labor is not contributing to reduce those inequalities. Actually, sometimes it's quite the other way around. So I think the Fair Work Initiative is a really interesting approach in order to not wait for the regulation, which is eventually will come, but it could be many years before that. But these things, and opening the dialogue, not only with the platforms, with the workers and with the consumers, which I will tell you more about, I think it's a really interesting approach, because change is already happening, and you keep promoting that until a consistent framework appears. So please stop me if you have any questions or comments. The methodology of the Fair Work program or initiative is to evaluate those platforms and score them according to those principles. Every principle has a threshold, like the minimum requirement, and then an extra. So each principle is associated with 2 points. So the maximum score that you can get is 10 out of 10. This has to do, or how do we make that score? We have 3 sources of information. Then we have, first of all, we have the desk research, which is to map the platforms and read over their terms and conditions or the contracts, if they have them. And in our case, specifically in the case of Argentina, we used the survey, which not only it gave us a lot of data, but it allowed us to establish a profile, who to interview. We didn't go to the representative agent. We also tried to go against the profile. If there are not many women in the ride-hailing sectors, let's interview a woman. Let's interview her. How is it like for the people who are not that common? And also interviewing the common sectors. So the second source is an interview to the workers. After we have a profile of the worker, we select a database, and then we start with the interviews. A funny thing, now that I'm making the second round of interviews, this is a yearly report, so I'm now starting the second year. I had the previous database from last year, from the previous report. Most of them are still working for the platform. I contacted once more. I said, do you remember the Fair Work Initiative? I'm going to interview. Are you interested? You still work for Uber, Didi, whoever? Most of them still do. So not only is it interesting in order to see the evolution, but as you may see, it's not a temporary job. So things must change. Things must be not as precarious as they already are. In our case, we did around, or we do a round of 6 interviews per platform, 6 workers per platform. Then we turn to the managers, the platform managers, the ones at least who reply, and we try to not only talk and discuss those principles, what are you doing in terms of that, but also transmit the main things, the main guidelines we extracted from this source. Okay, the workers mainly feel this, they tried this tool in the app, but it doesn't work. Are you doing something? Are you planning on doing something? Can you show us? Do you have evidence? They can't access the terms and conditions. Where can they download it? Have you changed them? Where is it able for them to access them? And then if they say something like, okay, we're about to apply this policy, we're about to change this, or we do have this already, they just don't know it, which is one of the main replies we get, then we turn back to those interviewees or another ones, just to check whether those things worked. So in this sense, we try to put all this together to compile them and see if there's enough evidence for the platforms to gain each score. Is it clear so far? So in Argentina, this is the scores they got. It's not a joke. Quite expected, but yeah. None of the platforms were able to prove that the workers earned at least above the minimum wage. You have to keep in mind that the minimum wage in Argentina is not enough for almost anything, mostly in Buenos Aires, it's not. And they weren't able to guarantee that the workers earned at least that. You may see, okay, but the minimum wage is set for a 8-hour day of work and 5 times per week. How do you calculate that? We bring that to the hour. We try to we do a separate analysis for each worker. We see how much they earn, how much hours they work per week, how much they spend in order to carry out those jobs. And then we compare that, we bring that to the hour, and then we compare that to the hourly minimum wage. None of them were able to guarantee that. Some of them earn above it. It's not that workers do not earn above minimum. The thing is that there's no guarantee. There's not a minimum fee. If you have to rent your car, you have an accident, you have no protection. If you get sick, you don't get to work. You don't get to earn money. So there only was one platform who achieved points. I'm not sure if this is a good example or not, but it was a nice evidence of opening to dialogue. It was the only platform who could prove that this is a ride-hailing company, in case you don't remember, it's Chinese. This is the only company that proved that the drivers, had insurance against accidents the whole time they were locked in. The other companies, for example, didn't cover them for the whole login time. It's just when you got a journey request, or even worse, when you pick up the passenger. If something happens to you when you're about to pick up the passenger, you're not covered. So this was the only one who proved that. Also, there was the availability of the contracts and the policy that states that if there's a change, you have to read them again, you have a time period to read them, and then you can sign them back, and then you can keep working. And also, a constant way of communication, actually, with the workers, no matter the rankings, their scoring systems. Some of them, for example, I might not say which one was it, but one of them, they have a ranking, riders, like gold, platinum, silver, whatever. And the human way of communication, like the telephone number in case they have an accident, is only available for the platinum workers. If not, if you have an accident, if you have a problem, you can't have a direct contact. You have a chat with a bot or maybe an email, nothing that can solve an urgency. And also the equity policy, I mean, inclusive policy, trying to incorporate women. They were about to release, it was about to release an interface regarding gender, trying to promote safe travels with women passengers and women drivers. Some platforms don't even reply, or sometimes they reply, but they don't provide the evidence, and they say, okay, I'm doing this, but they don't prove it. Hopefully this year we will be able to promote more things. However, this does not mean that Didi is a great example of a company. Actually, in other countries, it operates completely differently. It doesn't have a telephone channel. It doesn't have the possibility to download the terms and conditions. They are linked to another country. If you have a conflict, you have to resolve it at a trial in another country. So there's no guarantee. But this, sadly, this scoring is in line with the rest of the countries in Latin America. The average of the scores that platforms get is not that much above 0, sadly. So this is it. Yes, thank you. Let me know. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I was
Yeah.
wondering what was the 1 + 1? Could you explain what is
Yes,
the
let me go
1
back.
and the other one?
Let me go back. The one, sorry?
It was a score of 1 + 1 for 5 companies making 10, right?
Yes.
So what was the first one and the second one?
For Didi?
No, for the methodology.
The first one and the second one was fair pay.
Okay.
That has to do with achieving the minimum wage for the workers. And then the second point is the decent wage, like the living wage, sorry, like to achieve the decent cost of living. And in the second principle you asked as well is to have a way for you to, thank you so much. This is the new system actually, because we try to revise the principles or try to adapt them to the new context. The second principle is to mitigate all the risks that are linked to the job that you make. That's why the insurance that I told you for Didi was achieved in the first point. And then the second is more linked to mitigating or compensating those risks. How, for example, if you're sick, if you have maternity leave or something like that, or an accident, you get paid or reimbursed in case you don't get to work. And also it's linked to the data protection, isn't it? That's workers share a lot of the data, their GPS location and their personal data, how much they earn. The thing is that also the clients can contact them. So maybe I order a pizza and you're taking it to me and I call you and you bring it. Okay. But then I can call you afterwards. And what if you can do anything and the platform doesn't do anything to prevent that from happening, you know? Sorry, just for closing up, now we're able to open for the comments. I think this is a really interesting initiative just to try to cover, besides regulation, to stimulate the platforms to make changes, to transmit to them which are the main concerns, which are the main problems, to start the discussion before regulation, and also to promote better behavior from the consumers as well. One of the main things that consumers do afterwards is that if you show this, they can say, okay, for example, their tips aren't detailed when they have their income. So some of them they don't know how much they are being paid. Okay, so maybe it's better if I tip them in cash. Oh, if I had to choose between Didi, Cabify, and Uber, well, maybe I choose Didi. We're not assuming that platforms won't exist. Okay, they do exist. Okay, but maybe at this moment I will choose the one who's performing the best, you know? And that thing, in my opinion, is what could be like the first impulse. Okay, so now, yes. Thank you so much for letting me know if you have any comments. Yeah.
I'm sorry. So, first of all, I mean, thank you. It's really interesting.
Please.
There was the earlier slide which was talking about the number of hours worked and the perception of working for themselves.
Yes.
And I was wondering, I think there might be an explanation to it. I don't know whether or not you guys asked why they feel it. The thing I was thinking is, in the UK, we have laws which prevent the number of hours you can work per week for a company. I think you had also, there was a 2019 law of the same. So perhaps they feel as though they are their boss more because they're able to work beyond the number of hours which they would be allowed to were they to work for a more traditional employer. But I don't know what they're like. That's only one hypothesis. I don't know if you know why they felt.
Yeah, in our case, we had it wasn't that consistent because we had a mixture of situations that happened mostly with the migrant population. But the Argentinians were like quite oh, this is my only way out. I can't do anything else. The pandemic hit me all over. So, but that's an interesting approach. And the migrant population sometimes were more prone to saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for commenting.
Thank you.
Really interesting.
Excellent talk. Thanks a lot. Actually, I also interviewed some gig workers and algorithm designers for platform in China. Just 2 quick points. First is, how do you define fair pay? Because in my interview, I interviewed an algorithm designer. They were like, okay, you tell me what is fair. Do we like distribute the orders fairly to all the writers? Like, you know, okay, everybody get similar amounts of deals, orders, meaning similar amount of income, or we based on the grades. So apparently people have the grading system. So if you're a good writer, you have good manners or whatsoever, if you didn't spill, they have a better grade. Then the algorithm will allocate more orders to you. So which way is fair, more fair? I think there are a lot of different definitions of being fairness in this context. I don't know which one you use here, but the second point is that I wasn't very actually surprised that Didi got some points here at least, because there's a big scandal of Didi in China in 2019 and 2020 about those gig workers who, you know, afraid of being late and then got the punishment. So they were had some terrible traffic incident, everything. So there's this huge, massive scandal, and then the government intervention kicked in, and then Didi has to change a lot of their algorithms and everything. So maybe that apply to how Didi works in Argentina as well. So I'm wondering, the local platforms, like you mentioned, Rappi was Colombia. That's Argentina, right? So were there a lot of mass reports about the scandals, or, you know, our media or the public is criticizing, or how is it reported in the society?
Okay, well, I will start with the concept of fairness. We have 2 things. The fair pay principle goes to the wage, how much they get paid. But in principle 4, and now it's changing to principle 3, I think, we are measuring the algorithm, the transparency of the algorithm. And that has to do with, if you are ranked better, is it that you get paid more, or is it that you get more requests, like more journeys or more orders? And how clear is that policy? That's the thing that we try to do. If you want to rank them, and if you want to stimulate them to do more orders, or if you want to work in this area, for example, Cabify has a heat map that you can see as a driver, and you watch the areas of the city that are most demanded and that are paid the best, because it's supply and demand, no? But you can choose whether to go there. In other cases, it's not like that. They try to take you that place. So I won't send you trips to the green area. I will send you trips to this area because there's more demand. Okay, how clear is that? And are they paying you more for that? Are you getting more requests for that? So that's like two concepts. The fair pay has to do with how much you earn and how much you pay to earn that. How much cost you have. So it's just to estimate the net income, and to bear in mind that you have to pay for gas, that you have to pay for your own insurance, that you have to pay for the vehicle and the maintaining a vehicle, your data, the SIM card, your phone, and all of that. So there's two. I don't know if that's clear. And in the case of Didi, for the case of the regulation, and the case of Pedidos Ya in Argentina, there has been quite a situation with Pedidos Ya and Rappi, because they were studied as well. The province of Buenos Aires, we have the city of Buenos Aires, and outside we have the province. The province of Buenos Aires did some inspections, labor inspections, trying to see whether there was evidence of independent or dependent work. And they find, the thing is that as there are province, is not national, they can't make labor measures, but they did find them. And the riders did manifest, did like strikes, not so organized, like they were like own organized, there's not unions or labor organizations in that case, but it was quite, it was on the news. And mostly the thing about the fines that they got for having evidence. And the bad thing is that they mostly have to do, and it happened in many countries, with accidents. Nothing happens until one dies, or one has an accident, or one crashes a car, and one hits over a rider with a bike, you know? I think those, and it happens not only in Argentina, and it must have happened in China as well. Thank you for your comments.
I just had a quick question from the UK and other research. I know that there are lots of drivers who use multiple apps at the same time. And is this also the case in Argentina? And was there a link between them feeling more autonomous because they were using different apps at the same time?
Yeah, the multi-apping is more common in the case for ride-hailing. If they don't, they always have the 2 or 3 open platforms. Not so much in the case for the riders, the delivery companies, because the conditions are quite different. For example, in Pedidos Ya, you have to book for a time to work. Like, I'm booking from 4 to 7 in this area, and I will be working in this area. So in that case, they don't open Rappi.
Okay.
Rappi is whenever you log in, but they were transitioning towards booking schedules. So it's not that easy to overlap them. But in the case of the ride-hailing companies, although it is possible, and they used to have more than one app at the same time, it's like starting to turn into a monopoly now, but oligopoly. I mean, Bit, this one left the country. The bigger ones are Didi and Uber. There's also one called InDriver that you have to put a price, and then you have to change it, but it's not that big. And Cabify is registered as a a company from a neighborhood. It's the only one that's legal in Argentina. And they also, all of them have different conditions. And if the question is towards, okay, how do we regulate multi-apping? How do we see one person as an employer? Actually, with the domestic service law, you get a proportion for the hour, and it doesn't matter who your employee is, you're registered. So every hour you get paid from each employer you have, it has already in mind the contributions and the pensions, and it doesn't have to be only one employer paying that. Every hour is paid as a registered hour.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, so you had a slide where you went over the months, like average amount of months work.
Yes.
Do you mind going to that real
Yeah,
quick?
sure.
oh, sorry.
Oh, okay, no worry.
So, yeah, so two related questions here.
Yes.
First of all, you did mention that a lot of people tended to work for longer than they'd anticipated, and it was less temporary than they thought it was. I'm very curious as to how many people had a longer stint working on the apps, then perhaps took some time off of them and maybe returned and did another long stint. If that appeared in your data, and if so, how was that factored into the lengths shown here? Were those counted as two separate tenures? Were those combined into one longer tenure? Or how would situations like that have been treated in the data?
No, we didn't capture that much, but we did capture a really big impact of the pandemic, because we tried to open the survey into 3 questions. What was your work, your weekly hourly load before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and well, after, because 2021, but now that there are not so many restrictions. And you could see in both cases that the weekly load was a certain amount. It was big, it was high, but then it grew over the pandemic. And then after pandemic, it began to stabilize. So that's like stimulated more education. And other thing that we didn't see periods of time that they stopped working. But we did see workers that entered in the pandemic and started working. They are the ones that we want to interview right now, because they were too recent to be interviewed in this case, or to have more questions, but they were incorporated just to see the proportion. But the thing is that they get stabilized. And no, they do not leave. Could be in the case of solvers, because of pregnancy or having the possibility to have employers beyond the platform. Because as the platform works as a market, it's the more similar case of a marketplace. The employer then maybe says, okay, we can arrange like 2-3 times per week, and I pay you like this and that, and they work beyond the platform. And then when something happens, or they want to get another employer, they go back to the platform. But in those cases, it's not that common. I'm not reject.
I'm just gonna, before you get the second one in, if that's all right, because this links up with something we had online. So I'm gonna feed that in, and then we'll come back to the second bit of the question. If that's okay. You say there's 2 questions in. So there's somebody online has asked, do you agree with the following statement, that many people who had kind of stable non-gig jobs firstly get into platform work because it gave them promising incomes, and they did it as a kind of side hustle, but now many of them do it as a full-time job, and might be feeling somewhat trapped, but the conditions perhaps seem more unfair because that's the kind of addictive nature of this work to some degree, I think, is what they're pointing at. And then I'll modify that with a bit of my own. I'm going to take the privilege here of asking how much that shape that you were talking about in terms of working hours is following the broader macroeconomic environment in Argentina. So as there's a financial crisis, people have less disposable income to spend on services, which most of these are, right? Our workers talking about a drop-off in demand as the financial crisis bites, and could that be also relating? This online question is that there's actually a decrease in wages and
Drop-off in demand for labor, you mean?
or is it increasing?
Yeah, the hardest thing is to separate those impacts. Which one has to do with the labor market context, and the other is the platform. However, yeah, it does happen. I mean, I do agree with that statement, because when we make the interviews, we try to develop a little bit more from what we gathered in the surveys. And we try to ask those questions. Why did you start and why do you continue right now? And in those cases, it was, mainly it was to try to cope with the pandemic, or to try to do a project of your own and you're trying to save money for that. But then eventually, mainly the workers that I'm interviewing right now, they see that they are able to develop that project and they have to stay there. And most of them say, I wouldn't get paid more otherwise. This is the best that I can do at this moment. However, they don't seem to be that aware of their net income, as I just said. They are aware of how much they make per week, but they're not aware of the costs it involves. They're not aware of not only the occasional costs, the regular costs. Since it's day-to-day basis, it gets carried on and sustained and stabilized over time. And that's the main thing, the main conclusion that we could get so far. I don't think if I finish answering that question, I don't hear anything else in that questions. Okay.
I think there was one more in the room, right?
Did you have another question?
I know you answered both.
I was okay.
Amazing.
Yeah. I think you almost answered the question I had. I was gonna ask that if there were any qualitative data from the workers, that what do they think about all of this situation, and how much of an awareness they have regarding fair work, or what kind of demands they are imagining for themselves, how happy they are doing this sort of work, and why are they working over us, if they see it as a good thing or a bad thing, and what sort of needs and necessities they are voicing for themselves. So if you can say anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, there is qualitative data. It is mostly linked to, we asked about their satisfaction, what they would change, actually. And one of their main concerns is not pay, ironically, it's not pay, but it's mostly the communications channel. When they have a problem, they have nowhere to turn to. And that's one of the main things that we gather in those situations. And when we ask them, what would you need? What's the tool that should be added in order for you to be doing that? Is, I don't want to have a random blocking, or a blocking that I can't appeal, or if I have a problem, I can't call anyone. That's one of the main things that they complain about. And then regarding the terms and conditions, for example, they're not that aware, and they don't care that much about that, if they read it or not. They value that it's easy. They value that it's easy to access, that it's easy to register, to generate income. That's like the main assets in those cases, that it can help you. But once they stabilize and spend more time working for those things, they realize that they lack a lot of resources, and they end up wanting more tools, more aid, more protection. So mostly because they start hearing about colleagues who got robbed, or someone who got blocked, or even it happens to them. And once they start to hear that, they start to realize, oh, if it happens to me, maybe I won't like it so much, and it wouldn't have that amount of protection or solutions in that case.
What do they feel about the number of hours that they work? Are they made to work that many number of hours, or do they choose for themselves?
It's a mixture, actually. Yeah, because even the delivery riders, when they book those time schedules, when they finish their shifts, the platform sends them push-up notifications telling them, oh, if you stay for an hour longer, we can pay you a little bit more. Or if you move to this area, we can pay you a little bit higher. I mean, it's always your choice. You can accept, you can refuse, but there's a lot of encouragement from the platform to accommodate yourself to the higher demands hours. And that, for example, sorry that I'm doing a double click here, but that has a lot to do, and that is really evidence in gender cases. Women can't usually are not able to work in the high demanded hours, so they don't earn as much. So then you have a gap, you have an inequality that's not being worked upon.
Great. I think if it's all right, thank you very much for that, Pia. We'll wrap it up for now in the room because I'm aware of the time. But yes, we'll give Pia another round of applause. What I would say, I'm going to put words in your mouth here. We have the room until 2:30. So if there is anyone that wants to ask any other questions or have a chat with Pia, then we might be around. You're all right to stick around to in the room? So if anyone's got any questions, I don't know where people might have things to go to as well. But we have the room until 2:30, so please do feel free to stick around. I'm going to take advantage of that. And if anyone else would like to, please do. For everyone online, thank you very much for joining us. I'm glad to got all the questions that you asked in. Yeah, until next time. Thanks very much.
Bye. Thank you.